A good writer must also be a good reader. So, fellow writers, what are you reading these days, and what writing lessons can you learn from it to apply to your own writing? It's Sam with another Friday video for you. I will answer that question in just a second. Again, I am recording this one beforehand instead of going live like I usually do, just because June is so busy. We're actually going to be on the road on the 30th, Friday, visiting family. Or going to visit family in the Midwest. So actually, I'll be gone for the next 2 Fridays. So it's going to be a weird little time of just being off our normal schedule. I mean, good time to see family, but yeah, it's going to be on the road and all that stuff. So anyway, should have lots of time for reading. Should have lots of time for hopefully getting some maybe writing done and submitting to publishers too. Because I mean, even though we're seeing family, there's time in the car and there'll be downtime when I'm not, not doing my normal activities of work and stuff. So anyway, it'll be a good time. Anyway, books. What am I reading these days? Let me show you what I'm reading, and then I'll talk about it and tell you kind of my perspective and things that I've learned. Here's what I read lately. My last fiction read was Lovecraft Country by Matt Ruff. Okay, some of you heard of this one. They actually made it into a show a few years ago. I haven't watched the show yet. I've heard it's not as good as the novel. I mean, is it ever? And apparently there's a sequel that just came out this year. I didn't know about that either. My friends have told me about this one and told me I need to read it. So it's been on my list for a little while, and there it is. It's actually a little bit similar. I mean, not very, but in broad themes, it's similar to my last read. Last week I talked about Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. You can go back and find that one if you want to. I didn't do this on purpose. I didn't put them together next to each other on purpose. It was just the ones I had at certain times. This one came from the library, so that's just when I had it. And I don't always do 2 fiction books in a row. I try to vary with fiction and nonfiction. I think I mentioned this. I initially put Invisible Man in the placeholder for nonfiction, even though it is fiction. It's like, it's realistic and based on the person's life, I think. So I kind of classified that as a nonfiction one in my categorization. Lovecraft Country, like Invisible Man, takes place in the 50s in America, and is about a young black man and deals with the problem of racism. Unlike Invisible Man, it also contains magical fantasy elements. So I'm going to talk about that too. So yeah, here we go. It's basically in the 50s. There's a young black man. Actually, it's kind of an ensemble cast. It's like 2 families who are intertwined. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Of black people in America. Obviously, there's discrimination and racism. I mean, in the 50s, it's even before the Civil Rights Movement, so things are even worse than they are now. But in this world, there's magical realism and maybe you call it urban fantasy. I'm not quite sure the definitions of those. I have to look them up. But basically, it's the real world, but there's supernatural elements. So obviously, if you're not familiar, the name is a reference to H.P. Lovecraft and his works. I've read some Lovecraft. I'm not like a super Lovecraft fiend like some of my friends are, but I went through and read the major ones because I thought I would need to know them. I read Call of Cthulhu a while back. Have not read The Mountains of Madness. It's still on my list. Heard it's good. They were going to make a movie of it at one point, but I think it got scrapped, or it ended up in development in purgatory. Anyway, you don't actually have to know a lot about Lovecraft to read this book. I mean, the main characters, some of them are fans of that kind of thing. Like, they mentioned Lovecraft and some of those other fantasy sci-fi authors of those days, like Edgar Rice Burroughs and stuff like that. My friend Corbin, who I think first told me about this book, I got a lot of my book recommendations from Corbin. You've heard him on this video, on my podcast and these videos before. A good friend. We have a lot of the same tastes in fandoms and stuff like that. So when he tells me about a book, I'm like, oh, it's interesting. And I should eventually read it, but he reads a lot faster than I do. Anyway, yeah, I heard it was like, Lovecraftian elements with racial tension and racial issues, and like that sounds cool. I think I was kind of picturing like a Stranger Things, like people fighting monsters, like these horror monsters from another world coming out and terrorizing people, and like people fighting those monsters for their lives and stuff. That's kind of what I was envisioning originally, and it was not that. I mean, it was still good. I liked it, but it was not what I was expecting. The magical elements, they're there. They're more subtle and I wouldn't even call them all Lovecraftian. I mean, again, I'm not a Lovecraft expert. I have not read his entire canon, so he may have had different magical elements in there that I'm not aware of, but they're more subtle. Like in the first story, the main guy, his name is Atticus. The first story is, well, actually, I'll tell you about that in a minute. There's multiple different stories. Yeah, actually, let me just, I'll say that first. There's multiple different stories. It's broken up into like 8 stories, and it's the first one was the longest. It's like 100 pages, but they all kind of deal with different characters. I mean, they're interrelated. The characters overlap, and they eventually turn into one big story. But they focus on the different characters. That's cool. So the first one's about Atticus Turner. I think it's Turner. Yeah, looking for his dad. I think. Well, again, I haven't watched the show yet. I think they're going to make him the main character of the show, and I kind of expected Atticus to be the main character of the book, because the first story is like 100 pages long, and he's the main character. But then the next one goes into his friend Letitia, and then one's about her sister Ruby, one's about Atticus's uncle George, one's about Atticus's cousin Horace, one's about I forget who else. It's Atticus and his family, and then Letitia and her family, and they're kind of the main characters, and each story focuses on someone different, and they come together as a main story at the end. But it's also, in that way, it wasn't what I expected. It's not one narrative and not one main character. It's kind of different fragmented stories that come together, and go back to the magical elements. They're a little different. Again, it's not like Lovecraftian monsters unleashed in the world. It's like there's the kind of the villain, if there is a consistent villain, is this young man named Caleb Braithwaite, and he's part of some like secret society, like one of those, I don't know, the Illuminati or something, whatever they call themselves, studying like he has the elite, rich white power, but he also has like magical abilities, or has studied to gain magical abilities or something, and he's trying to use Atticus and his family. I mean he's subtle. He's more conniving than openly malicious. He doesn't act openly hostile, but he clearly is using them and trying to get magical power for himself. One of the stories is about a ghost that lives in an old house. One of the stories is about someone going to a portal and visiting another planet. One of the stories is about a potion that someone drinks. I think, Ruby, Letitia's sister, drinks this potion, and when she does, she's able to temporarily turn into a white woman, and of course that opens up possibilities for her and leads to some interesting social commentary on race and difference and things like that. So it's interesting stuff. It's all cool fantasy stuff. It's not what I expected when I was thinking of Lovecraftian monsters and stuff like that. It's not what I expected, but so that's why I say it's more like urban fantasy, maybe subtle magical realism, real world with magical elements. I certainly don't think the magical elements overwhelm the real world drama. There were times I couldn't even tell when, or I couldn't remember what's the magic here again, because it does seem to focus more on the real world drama. If anything, the magic was more subtle than I initially expected, and I think that helped it. So I've said this before, so just I'll take this last little bit to talk about writing applications, things you can learn from this kind of story. I know I've made this comment before, I'm sure, but a lot of our stories, we have realistic elements and fantasy elements. So, I mean, even if your story doesn't take place on Earth, I mean, mine's about superheroes, so it has Earth plus the fantastic, but I mean, even if your story doesn't take place on Earth or is in a fantasy land, you want your characters to feel realistic, and you want them to act like real people, and you probably want to deal with some real issues, at least on some level. So you still have realism on some level, at least real characters and themes, and supernatural elements or fantastic elements. You want to combine those together in a way that makes for a fun story, but still brings out the characters and develops them. This is a good way to do it. I also talked about worldview a little bit a few weeks ago. I think this one also shows the worldview of anti-racism without being preachy. I mean, there's no like lecture from the author or the narrator or anything like that. There's no about why racism is bad. Rather than lecturing you or preaching, they show you just through the actions and the situations. So it does well at combining real elements with fantasy and at giving worldview without being preachy. So go check it out. Lovecraft Country, Matt Ruff, fun read. Yeah, all that good stuff. And taught me a few things about writing too. Thanks for watching. Have a great week, everyone. I'll see you next time. Bye.